My father kicked me out of the house, screaming that I needed to pay my own bills. So, I quietly packed my things, canceled every utility account in my name, and let the darkness consume his perfect new life. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The thermometer on my nightstand glowed with a faint, harsh red light, displaying a number that made my heavy eyes ache even more. 102.4 degrees. I had been battling a relentless, bone-deep flu for 3 days, my body trapped in a miserable cycle of freezing chills and suffocating sweats. My throat felt like it was lined with crushed glass, and every breath I drew in the stifling air of my childhood bedroom was a conscious, painful effort. I was a 26-year-old freelance financial analyst who was used to crunching numbers for 14 hours straight, but in that moment, just lifting my head off the damp pillow felt like moving a mountain. I pulled the heavy, floral quilt up to my chin, shivering violently, hoping the fever would finally break so I could get back to my spreadsheets. Deadlines didn't care about viruses. Then, the heavy oak door of my bedroom slammed open, the sound echoing like a gunshot against my pounding headache. I flinched, pulling the covers tighter, blinking through the haze of my fever. Standing in the doorway was William, my father. He was 58, a man who managed a local hardware store but walked around with the unearned confidence of a titan of industry. Behind him, hovering like a well-dressed shadow, was Veda. She was his new fiancée, a 50-year-old self-proclaimed life coach whose perfectly styled blonde hair and perpetually calm, condescending smile always set my teeth on edge. "Get up, Sophia," William barked, his voice devoid of any parental warmth or concern for the fact that I looked like a ghost. He crossed his arms over his chest, his face flushed with an angry, self-righteous color. "We need to talk. Now." "Dad," I croaked, my voice barely a raspy whisper. I tried to sit up, the room spinning wildly around me. "I'm sick. I've been throwing up all morning. Can this please wait until tomorrow?" "No, it cannot wait," he snapped, taking a heavy step into the room. He didn't look at the thermometer. He didn't look at the pale sheen of sweat on my forehead. He only looked at me with a profound, sudden disgust. "Veda and I have been discussing our future, our household, and frankly, we are tired of the freeloading." I stared at him, my fever-addled brain struggling to process the words. "Freeloading?" I repeated slowly, the syllables feeling alien in my mouth. "You heard him, sweetie," Veda chimed in from the doorway. Her voice was smooth, practiced, and dripping with fake sympathy. She tilted her head, looking at me as if I were a stray dog that had tracked mud onto her pristine carpets. "You're a grown woman, Sophia. It's simply not healthy for your personal growth to be living under your father's roof, eating his food, taking up space in a house that he is trying to build a new life in. We are establishing boundaries. Healthy boundaries." "Boundaries?" I choked out, a sudden spike of adrenaline slicing through the fog of my illness. "Dad, what is she talking about? I've lived here my whole life. I work from here. "You hide here," William interrupted, his voice raising to a furious yell that rattled the framed photos on my dresser. "You sit on your computer all day playing with numbers while I go out and work a real job. I am 58 years old. I shouldn't have to support a grown adult. If you're so smart, if you're such a hotshot analyst, then pay your own bills." The sheer absurdity of his statement hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to argue, to remind him of the reality of our situation, but before I could utter a single word, he delivered the final strike. "I want you out," he demanded, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Pack your things. I want you out of this house tonight. Veda needs this room for her meditation space." I looked from my father, a man I had spent the last 5 years quietly protecting from his own incompetence, to Veda, who was wearing a subtle, victorious smirk. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and suffocating. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The physical act of packing up 26 years of existence while running a severe fever is a specific kind of torture I wouldn't wish on anyone. Every time I bent over to place a book or a folded sweater into a cardboard box, the room tilted dangerously, black spots dancing in my peripheral vision. I had to sit on the edge of my strip. De-mattress every 10 minutes just to catch my breath, my lungs burning, my entire body protesting the exertion. Through the thin drywall, I could hear them downstairs. The clinking of wine glasses, the low, melodic hum of Veda's laughter, the booming, relaxed sound of William's voice. They were celebrating. They were having a lovely, romantic evening while I was upstairs, sick and discarded, being erased from my own home so Veda could have a room to burn sage in. Tears of frustration and physical agony streamed down my face, stinging my hot skin. I needed help. I couldn't carry these boxes down the stairs by myself. Desperate, I reached for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I scrolled to the contact for Lincoln, my 30-year-old brother. Lincoln was a real estate agent who lived on the other side of the city. He had moved out the second he turned 18, washing his hands of our family's messy dynamics. But surely, I thought, surely he would intervene now. I pressed call and held the phone to my ear, listening to it ring. "What's up, Soph?" Lincoln answered, the background noise of a noisy restaurant filtering through the speaker. He sounded distracted, impatient. "Lincoln," I rasped, trying to keep the sob out of my voice. "Dad just kicked me out. Tonight, I have a 102-degree fever, and he's forcing me to leave so Veda can have my room. Please, can you talk to him, or can you come help me move my stuff?" There was a long pause on the line. The clinking of silverware in the background seemed incredibly loud. "Look, Sophia," Lincoln finally sighed, his tone heavy with irritation. "I told you to get out of there years ago. You stayed. You know how Dad gets. He's stressed. And honestly, Veda makes him happy. Why do you always have to be so difficult?" "Difficult?" I gasped, clutching the phone tightly. "I'm sick, Lincoln. I literally cannot carry these boxes. Take an Uber to a motel, sleep it off, and come back for your stuff tomorrow," he said dismissively. "I'm at a networking dinner. I can't leave right now. Stop playing the victim, Sophia. Just grow up and let him live his life." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, staring at the darkened screen. The feeling of isolation was absolute. My father had thrown me away like garbage, and my brother had essentially told me I deserved it. I was entirely, fundamentally alone. I forced myself to stand back up, my legs trembling. I grabbed a roll of packing tape, the loud RREEP sound masking a new, different kind of sound bubbling up inside me. It wasn't a sob. It was a cold, hollow laugh. I dragged my suitcase toward the door, my eyes scanning the room one last time. My gaze landed on the small filing cabinet tucked in the corner of my closet. Inside that cabinet were folders of bank statements, utility agreements, and property tax receipts. As I looked at that cabinet, the crushing weight of the betrayal began to morph into something else. The sadness crystallized into a sharp, freezing anger. William and Veda thought they had won. They thought they had successfully purged the freeloader from their perfect domain. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the sheer, breathtaking audacity of my father calling me a freeloader, you have to understand what happened 5 years ago. When I was 21, still in the middle of my university studies, my mother passed away suddenly from an aneurysm. It was a devastating, earth-shattering loss. My mother had been the anchor of our family, not just emotionally, but practically. Within a month of her funeral, the facade of my father's competence completely crumbled. Without her managing the budget, William was lost. He was a retail manager who spent his money on expensive golf clubs and new cars he couldn't afford, ignoring the mounting pile of red-stamped envelopes on the kitchen counter. One afternoon, I came home from a lecture to find the electricity shut off. My father was sitting in the dark, his head in his hands, completely paralyzed by a stack of final notice bills. He had maxed out his credit cards, drained the meager savings, and was 2 months behind on the mortgage. I didn't yell, I didn't judge. I loved my father and I knew he was grieving. So, I stepped up. I took over. I used the small inheritance my grandmother had left me for college to bring the mortgage current. I used my skills as a financial analyst to consolidate his debts. And most importantly, because his credit score was absolutely ruined and no company would extend him service, I transferred every single utility bill, the electricity, the water, the gas, the internet, and even the property tax portal, into my own name. I linked them to my personal bank account, setting up autopay so he would never have to sit in the dark again. For 5 years, I worked grueling freelance hours to ensure those bills were paid. My father never asked how the lights stayed on. He never inquired about the water bill. He just assumed that because he bought the groceries once a week, he was providing for us. I let him believe it, protecting his fragile ego. Then 6 months ago, Veda arrived. William met her at a wellness seminar he attended on a whim. From the moment she stepped into our house, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. Veda was immaculate, her clothes expensive, her vocabulary filled with buzzwords like manifesting, toxic energy, and financial abundance. She claimed to be a life coach with a thriving practice, yet she never seemed to have any clients, and she moved into our house within 3 weeks of dating my father. Her manipulation was masterful. She didn't attack me directly at first. Instead, she planted small, poisonous seeds in William's mind. I remembered a conversation from a month ago. I was working at the kitchen island, surrounded by spreadsheets, when Veda glided into the room, pouring herself a glass of my father's expensive wine. "You work so hard, Sophia," she had said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She leaned over the counter, her eyes darting across my laptop screen. "It must be wonderful to live here rent-free, able to just save all your little pennies. William is so generous to provide this sanctuary for you." I had paused, biting my tongue. "I contribute, Veda." "Oh, of course you do, sweetie," she laughed, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "But let's be honest. This is William's house, his asset, his hard work. I was just looking at the property values in this neighborhood. They've skyrocketed. It's such a valuable estate. It's important that William protects his assets, don't you think? Ensures his future is secure." She had looked at me then, her eyes cold and calculating beneath the warm smile. She wasn't looking at a daughter, she was looking at an obstacle. She was looking at the house, calculating its worth, and figuring out how to get me out of it so she could have total control over my oblivious father. And now she had succeeded. She had convinced my father that I was a parasite, draining his resources. I zipped up my final suitcase, the metallic sound loud in the empty room. I wiped a sheen of fever sweat from my brow, my breathing ragged. I walked over to the filing cabinet, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a thick blue folder labeled Household Accounts. I tucked it securely under my arm. They wanted me to pay my own bills. They wanted to manage their own lives without my freeloading presence. I walked down the stairs, ignoring their sudden, uncomfortable silence as I dragged my luggage to the front door. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cold night air, the fever burning in my veins, holding the blue folder tight against my chest. It was time to give them exactly what they asked for. The motel room smelled strongly of artificial lemon cleaner and old, stale dust, but to me, it was a sanctuary. It took 3 full days for my fever to finally break. During those 72 hours, I barely moved from the sagging, lumpy mattress, surviving on tepid tap water and the sheer, burning adrenaline of my sudden exile. When I finally woke up on the 4th morning with a clear head and a normal temperature, the sadness had entirely evaporated. In its place was a sharp, calculating clarity. I sat at the wobbly laminate desk in the corner of the room, flipped open my laptop, and placed the thick blue Household Accounts folder beside it. My father had demanded that I pay my own bills and stop freeloading. It was time to honor his wishes to the exact letter. I started with the electricity. I dialed the customer service number, navigating the automated voice prompts until a cheerful representative named Sarah answered the line. "Hi, I need to make a change to the account for the property on Elm Street," I said, my voice steady and professional. "My name is Sophia, the account holder." "Of course, Sophia," Sarah replied, the sound of her keyboard clacking cheerfully in the background. "Are you looking to transfer your service to a new address?" "No," I answered smoothly. "I am moving out of the state entirely. I need to schedule a complete and total disconnection of service. I want the meters locked and the account closed." "Oh, okay, we can certainly do that. What date would you like the disconnection to occur?" I looked at the digital calendar on my laptop screen. I counted exactly 30 days from the night I was forced out into the cold. William always received his managerial bonus at the end of the month, which was also when he typically hosted his self-congratulatory dinners. Veda had already been bragging on her public social media about a home blessing dinner party she was planning for her new friends to show off her new sanctuary. The date lined up perfectly. "The 25th of next month," I told Sarah. "First thing in the morning, please." I repeated His exact, methodical process for the water company, the natural gas provider, and the high-speed internet service. With every confirmation number I wrote down in my blue folder, a heavy weight lifted from my shoulders. For 5 years, I had drained my own income to keep that house running. I had sacrificed vacations, savings, and my own peace of mind to protect a man who had thrown me out the moment a grifter whispered in his ear. Next, I logged into the county's property tax portal. My credit card was securely saved on file, set to automatically deduct the quarterly installments that kept the house from falling into delinquency. With a single, satisfying click of my mouse, I deleted my payment method. The trap was officially set. Now, I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with. I opened a new browser tab and began using the investigative skills that made me a highly sought-after financial analyst. I searched for Veda's supposed life coaching business. Her website was a masterpiece of vague, spiritual word salad, filled with stock photos of women doing yoga on mountains, but it lacked any actual credentials, pricing structures, or physical addresses. I dug deeper into the state's business registry. There was no LLC registered under her name in our state. I checked the neighboring states. Nothing. I ran a search through public court records, looking for anything tied to her phone number or email address. What I found made my blood run cold. There were multiple small claims filings against a woman with Veda's exact full name and matching phone number in a county 3 hours north. The details were obscured behind a paywall, but the plaintiff names were all older, single men. I realized I was out of my depth. I needed a professional. Later that afternoon, I drove to a nondescript office park on the edge of town and walked into the office of Marcus Sterling, a licensed private investigator. I slid a retainer check across his desk, along with a printout of Veda's website and the court docket numbers I had scraped from the internet. "I need to know everything about this woman," I told Marcus, looking him dead in the eye. "Who she is, who she owes money to, and exactly how many families she's destroyed before mine." Marcus looked at the paperwork, then at me. "Give me a week, Sophia. If she's hiding something, I'll find it." 10 days later, I needed to return to the house. In my feverish rush to pack, I had left behind a small fireproof lockbox containing my birth certificate, my passport, and some of my late mother's jewelry. I waited until a Tuesday afternoon, knowing my father's retail schedule usually had him working the floor until 6 o'clock. I parked down the street and walked up the familiar driveway. My key still turned in the front door lock. The moment I stepped inside, the pungent, overwhelming stench of burning sage and heavily perfumed incense assaulted my senses. The house didn't look like my home anymore. The framed family photos that used to line the hallway had been replaced by cheap, mass-produced canvas prints of mandala patterns and inspirational quotes. I walked quietly up the stairs and opened the door to my old bedroom. I gasped. The room had been completely gutted. My bookshelves were gone. The walls, previously a soft, comforting blue, had been hastily painted a jarring, mustard yellow. In the center of the room sat a single, massive floor cushion surrounded by unlit candles. Veda's meditation sanctuary. I thought we discussed healthy boundaries, Sophia. I spun around. Veda was standing in the doorway, wearing a flowing silk robe, holding a steaming mug of tea. Her smile was perfectly in place, but her eyes were cold and sharp. Surprisingly, William was standing right behind her, wearing his work slacks and a polo shirt. He must have come home for a late lunch. "What are you doing here?" my father demanded, stepping around Veda to block the hallway. "You don't live here anymore. You can't just waltz in." "I left my lockbox," I said, my voice remarkably steady. I walked over to the closet, relieved to see the small metal box still sitting on the top shelf. I pulled it down and turned to face them. "I'll be out of your hair in a minute." "You really need to respect your father's space, sweetie," Veda sighed, taking a delicate sip of her tea. "Your negative energy is incredibly disruptive to the peace we are trying to cultivate in this home." I looked at her, really looked at her. I thought about the hours I had spent reviewing the preliminary data Marcus, the PI had sent me over the weekend. "Speaking of cultivating things, Veda," I said, taking a slow step toward the center of the room. "I was trying to update my professional networking portfolio the other day. I thought I would look up your life coaching LLC to see if I could send some corporate clients your way. It's funny, though." Veda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "My practice is entirely referral-based, Sophia. I don't maintain a large digital footprint. It's intentional." "Is it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because the state business registry has absolutely no record of you. Anywhere. But I did find something interesting in the county court database. Did you know there's a woman with your exact name who was sued for commercial rent fraud 3 years ago? Apparently, she signed a lease for a wellness center, never paid a dime, and had to be forcibly evicted by the sheriff." The silence in the room was absolute. William frowned, looking back and forth between us. "Sophia, what are you talking about?" "It's a clerical error," Veda snapped, her voice suddenly shrill, the calm, guru persona instantly vanishing. The tea sloshed dangerously over the rim of her mug. "It was a misunderstanding with a deeply toxic, abusive landlord who tried to extort me." "Extort you?" I challenged, taking another step forward. "The court documents say you provided fake bank statements to secure the lease. That's not a misunderstanding, Veda. That's fraud." "William," Veda gasped, turning to my father and placing a trembling hand on his chest. Her eyes instantly filled with enormous, theatrical tears. "Are you going to let her stand there and slander me? In our home? She's obsessively stalking me. She's trying to ruin our happiness because she's a jealous, bitter little girl who can't stand that you've moved on." My father's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. He didn't look at the logic of my words. He only saw his new fiancée crying. "Get out," William roared, pointing a shaking finger at the stairs. "I am sick of your lies, Sophia. You are so determined to be the victim that you are making up insane stories to hurt the woman I love. Get out of my house and do not ever come back." I didn't argue, I didn't yell. I simply gripped my lockbox, walked past them, and descended the stairs. Veda's reaction had given me all the confirmation I needed. She was panicked, she was sloppy, and her facade was cracking. 2 weeks later, the stakes escalated entirely out of my control. I was sitting in a corner booth at a quiet diner on the edge of town, nursing a black coffee. Across from me sat Marcus, the private investigator. He didn't look happy. He reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope, dropping it onto the Formica table with a dull thud. "You were right to trust your gut, Sophia," Marcus said grimly, sliding the envelope toward me. "She's a piece of work, a professional parasite." I opened the clasp and pulled out the stack of documents. It wasn't just commercial rent fraud, it was a pattern. "Her real name is Valerie," Marcus explained, pointing to a background check document. "She legally changed it to Veda 4 years ago. Over the last decade, she has targeted at least 3 different older, financially secure men. She moves in quickly, isolates them from their families using this toxic energy nonsense, and then convinces them to refinance their homes to fund her fake wellness businesses. I stared at the pages, feeling physically ill. There were bankruptcy filings from 2 different men. There were restraining orders filed by the children of her previous victims. Once the equity is drained and the credit is ruined, Marcus continued, his voice low, she vanishes, leaving the men to deal with the foreclosure. She has 3 active civil judgments against her that she's dodging. My father, I whispered, panic suddenly gripping my throat. He doesn't have any equity. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. He has nothing for her to steal. She probably doesn't know that yet, Marcus pointed out. He likely acts like he owns the place free and clear, but she'll find out eventually. And when she does, she'll either drain whatever small credit he has left, or she'll force him to sell the property to get her hands on the cash. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message from William. We need to meet. Veda and I are doing some estate planning. There is a document you need to sign regarding your lack of financial interest in the property so we can move forward with our future. Coffee shop on Main sent 2 p.m. I looked up at Marcus. She's making her move. At exactly 2:00 p.m., I walked into the busy coffee shop. William and Veda were already sitting at a small, circular table near the back. Veda looked pristine, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, but there was a tight, anxious pinch to her jaw. William looked exhausted, his posture slumped, but his eyes hardened as I approached. Sit down, William commanded. He didn't offer to buy me a coffee. He simply pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a crudely drafted legal document, essentially a quitclaim deed, stating that I, Sophia, relinquished any and all current or future financial claims to the estate on Elm Street. Sign it, William said. Veda's lawyer said this is necessary to ensure our assets are protected from outside interference. Outside interference? I asked, ignoring the pen he held out to me. You mean me? You've proven you can't be trusted, Sophia, Veda said smoothly, folding her hands on the table. This is just a formality to establish those healthy boundaries we discussed. I didn't look at the document. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope Marcus had given me. I opened it and pulled out the top 3 pages, the civil judgments against Valerie, complete with her photograph and the detailed accounts of her defrauding her previous victims. I slid the documents directly over her fake quitclaim deed. I don't have a financial interest in the house, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the coffee shop. But she does. William frowned, looking down at the papers. What is this? Those are court records, Dad, I said, leaning forward. Her name isn't Veda, it's Valerie, and you aren't her soulmate. You are her 4th mark. She targets older men, isolates them from their children, convinces them to pull the equity out of their homes, and then abandons them when the bank forecloses. This is insane, Veda hissed, lunging forward to snatch the papers. I slammed my hand down on the documents, trapping them against the table. I glared at her, my patience entirely exhausted. Don't touch them. William, she forged these, Veda cried, her voice rising in panic. People at the neighboring tables began to turn and stare. She hired someone to make these up. I told you she was obsessed. She is deeply, deeply unwell. William stared at the photograph on the civil judgment. It was undeniably Veda. He stared at the name, Valerie. He looked at the dollar amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen equity. For a fleeting second, I saw profound doubt crack the foundation of his anger. I saw the terrifying realization begin to dawn in his eyes. But the spell was too strong, and his pride was too fragile. To admit I was right meant admitting he had thrown his only daughter out on the street for a con artist. He violently shoved the papers back across the table toward me. I don't want to see your manufactured drama, Sophia, William growled, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His face was purple with rage and denial. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but it ends now. You are dead to me. Do you understand? Dead to me. He turned and stormed out of the coffee shop. Veda lingered for 1 second longer. She leaned across the table, the sweet, guru mask entirely gone. Her face twisted into a vicious, ugly sneer. "You're just a jealous, pathetic little girl," she whispered venomously. "You lost. He's mine. The house is mine. Stay out of our way, or I will make sure you regret it." She spun on her heel and followed my father out the door. I sat alone at the table, calmly gathering the court documents and sliding them back into the envelope. I wasn't upset. I wasn't crying. I pulled out my phone and checked the calendar. The 25th of the month was exactly 3 days away, the day of Veda's grand dinner party. She thought she had won. She thought she had the house. She had no idea that the house she was fighting so hard to steal was about to go completely, entirely dark. The 25th arrived with a crisp, biting chill in the air, the kind of evening that demanded warmth and light. I sat in my car, parked half a block away from the house I had grown up in, watching the spectacle unfold. The street was lined with expensive luxury vehicles, BMWs, Audis, a pristine white Mercedes, belonging to the high-vibrational friends Veda had invited to her grand home blessing. I had spent the entire day reviewing my spreadsheets, finalizing the last of my client reports, and waiting for the sun to set. Earlier that week, I had made one final call to the utility companies, utilizing my status as the primary account holder to adjust the exact hour of the disconnections. I didn't want the lights to go out in the morning when the house was empty. I wanted them to go out at exactly 7:30 p.m., right as Veda would be serving her catered, outrageously expensive dinner. At 7:15 p.m., I stepped out of my car. The cold air stung my cheeks, but my internal temperature was running hot with a mixture of anxiety and an undeniable, righteous anticipation. I walked up the familiar driveway, my boots crunching softly on the pavement. I didn't bother knocking. I still had my key. I slid it into the lock, turned it with a quiet click, and pushed the heavy oak door open. The sensory assault was immediate. The house smelled of roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and the cloying, artificial scent of Veda's signature floral perfume. A cacophony of pretentious laughter and clinking crystal echoed from the formal dining room, a room we had barely used since my mother passed away. I walked silently down the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stopped in the arched doorway of the dining room and took in the scene. It was a grotesque parody of a happy family. The long mahogany table was covered in a pristine white linen cloth, adorned with towering silver candelabras that hadn't been lit yet and massive bouquets of imported lilies. 12 strangers, dressed in designer clothes, sat around the table, sipping wine and laughing. At the head of the table sat my father, William. He was wearing a new tailored suit he couldn't afford. A strained, desperate smile plastered across his face as he tried to keep up with a conversation about summering in Tuscany. At the opposite end, in the seat that used to belong to my mother, sat Veda. She was wearing an emerald green silk gown, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant updo, holding court like a queen in a stolen castle. "And so," Veda was saying, her voice projecting across the room, "William and I realized that to truly manifest abundance, we needed a sanctuary. This house was clouded with such stagnant, heavy energy before I arrived. We had to do a complete spiritual and physical cleanse to prepare for our new life together." "Well, you've done a marvelous job, Veda," a woman dripping in diamonds cooed from the left side of the table. "The space feels incredibly light." "Thank you, darling," Veda beamed. "It was a struggle, frankly. We had to establish some very firm, very difficult boundaries with toxic elements of William's past to secure this peace. But as I always say, you must clear out the weeds so the flowers can bloom." "I'm not a weed, Valerie," I said loudly, my voice slicing through the elegant hum of the room like a machete. "And this isn't your house." The entire table froze. 12 pairs of eyes snapped toward the doorway. The clinking of silverware ceased instantly. William's face drained of all color, his skin turning a sickly, ashen gray. He stood up so quickly his chair wobbled dangerously behind him. "Sophia," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and immediate defensive rage. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you never to set foot in this house again." Veda stood up slowly, carefully setting her wine glass down. The guru mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of pure, venomous panic, but she quickly smoothed her features into a look of condescending pity. "Oh, William," she sighed theatrically, placing a hand over her heart. "I told you she would do this. She's completely unhinged. Sophia, sweetie, this is deeply inappropriate. You are ruining a sacred gathering." "You don't know the meaning of the word sacred," I replied, stepping fully into the dining room. I carried a thick, black leather portfolio under my arm. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, ignoring the gasps and whispered murmurs of the guests. "And I'm not here to ruin your gathering. I'm here to deliver a reality check, because it seems my father has forgotten how this house actually operates." "Get out," William bellowed, his face now flushing a dark, dangerous purple. "I will call the police, Sophia. I swear to God, I will have you arrested for trespassing." "I'm not trespassing, Dad," I said calmly. "I still receive mail here, but more importantly, I'm the one who holds the contracts for every single utility that makes this house habitable." I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. The brass minute hand clicked audibly into place. 7:30 p.m. "In fact," I continued, turning to look directly into Veda's widening, panicked eyes, "you were just talking about clearing out the heavy energy. Let's see how much energy is really left." Right on cue, as if the universe itself was waiting for my command, the heavy hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen abruptly died. The soft, ambient light from the chandelier above the table flickered wildly for one agonizing second. And then, with a definitive, echoing clack from the smart meter outside, the entire house was plunged into pitch-black darkness. Someone screamed. Several guests knocked over their wine glasses in the sudden, blinding shock, the sound of shattering crystal and spilling liquid filling the room. "What did you do?" William roared from the darkness, his voice cracking with panic. "What the hell did you do to the power?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out a heavy-duty tactical flashlight I had brought specifically for this moment, and clicked it on. The blinding white beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the terrified, confused faces of Veda's high society friends. I panned the light until it rested squarely on Veda, who was clutching the edge of the table, her face contorted in absolute fury. "I didn't do anything to the power, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm in the chaotic darkness. "I just stopped paying for it. You told me to pay my own bills. You told M.E. to stop freeloading. So I took my name and my credit card off of your accounts." "That's a lie," William shouted, stumbling around the table toward me. "I pay the bills. I'm the man of this house." "You haven't paid a single electric, water, gas, or internet bill in 5 years, William," I yelled back, refusing to back down. The raw, unfiltered truth echoed off the dark walls. "Ever since Mom died and you blew through the savings, I have been draining my own accounts to keep you afloat. I paid the property taxes. I consolidated your credit cards. I bought the groceries while you bought golf clubs. You have absolutely nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the harsh, ragged breathing of my father. "And you," I said, swinging the flashlight beam back to Veda. "You thought you hit the jackpot, didn't you? You thought you found a rich, grieving widower with a paid-off estate that you could drain and discard, just like you did to Richard in Springfield and Thomas in Oakbrook." I unzipped the leather portfolio I had been carrying and pulled out a stack of manila folders. I tossed them onto the center of the linen-covered table. "For the benefit of the guests," I announced loudly, "the woman hosting you tonight is not a life coach named Veda. Her legal name is Valerie. She is a professional con artist with 3 active civil judgments against her for real estate fraud and active warrants in 2 neighboring counties for grand larceny." "Shut up," Veda shrieked, her voice losing entirely its cultured, melodic tone, turning into a harsh, grating screech. She lunged across the table in the dark, grabbing the folders and frantically trying to tear them apart. She's insane. She's a jealous, psychotic bitch. None of this is true. But it was too late. One of the guests, a man in a sharp suit who looked like a lawyer, had already picked up a stray page that had fluttered near him. He pulled out his cell phone, turned on the flashlight app, and read the court document. "Good Lord," the man muttered, his eyes widening. He looked up at Veda, his expression morphing into utter disgust. "This is a sworn affidavit from a bankruptcy judge. It has your photograph on it." "It's a mistake," Veda pleaded, reaching out toward the man. "Don't touch me," he snapped, stepping back. He turned to his wife. "Martha, get your coat. We are leaving. Now." The spell was broken. Total panic erupted among the guests. They scrambled in the dark, using their phone flashlights to find their coats and bags, desperate to escape the humiliating, disastrous scene. They shoved past Veda, ignoring her frantic, pathetic pleas for them to stay, practically sprinting out the front door and into their luxury cars. Within 2 minutes, the house was entirely empty of guests. Only 3 of us remained in the dark, freezing dining room. William was standing perfectly still. The flashlight beam from my hand caught the edge of his face. He was staring at the scattered court documents on the table. The reality of his situation, the sheer, catastrophic depth of his foolishness and my sacrifice, had finally, brutally, crashed down upon him. "Dad," I said softly, the anger finally bleeding out of my voice, leaving only a profound, exhausted sadness. "The water is shut off, too, and the gas will be disconnected tomorrow morning. You have no money, you have no credit, and you traded the only person who actually loved you for a parasite." Veda, realizing that the audience was gone and the charade was over, dropped the shredded papers. She didn't look at William. She looked directly at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. "You ruined everything," she snarled, taking a step toward me, her hands balled into fists. "I put 6 months into this miserable old fool. I earned this house." "The house is leveraged to the hilt, Valerie," I replied, a cold, hard smile touching my lips. "There's no equity left. You spent 6 months playing the loving fiancé for a man who is one missed paycheck away from bankruptcy. You wasted your time." Veda froze. She turned slowly to look at William. "Is that true?" she demanded, her voice flat and vicious. "Is this house mortgaged?" William couldn't even look at her. He simply nodded, his shoulders sagging, tears finally spilling over his eyelids and tracking down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he whispered brokenly. "You pathetic, worthless loser," Veda spat, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. The transformation was horrifying. The loving, spiritual guru vanished forever, replaced by a cold, calculating predator who realized her trap was empty. "You let me believe you had money. You let me cater to you like you were some kind of king, and you're nothing but a broke, sad old man." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the dining room, her high heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. "I'm packing my things," she yelled from the stairs, "and I'm aching the silver." "Actually, Valerie, you're not taking anything." The new voice came from the front hallway. Heavy footsteps echoed on the wood, accompanied by the distinct, static crackle of a police radio. Marcus, the private investigator, walked into the dining room, sweeping a massive, high-powered flashlight across the space. Behind him were 2 uniformed police officers from the local precinct. "Valerie Vance," Marcus said, reading from a clipboard. "We've been in contact with the Sheriff's Department in Oakbrook County. They were very interested to hear where you've been hiding. They have an active felony warrant for your arrest regarding the systematic defrauding of a vulnerable adult." Veda froze halfway up the stairs. She looked at the police officers, her face pale, her eyes darting frantically, calculating any possible escape route. But there was none. She slumped against the banister, the fight completely draining out of her. The officers walked up the stairs, handcuffed her without incident, and led her back down. She didn't say a single word as they escorted her out the front door. the flashing red and blue lights from the squad cars outside briefly illuminating the dark house. When the door clicked shut, the silence was absolute. The cold was beginning to seep through the walls, the lack of central heating making itself known. William collapsed into his chair at the head of the table. He buried his face in his hands, and a sound came from him that I had never heard before, a deep, agonizing, soul-tearing sob. It was the sound of a man whose pride had been utterly destroyed, whose illusions had been shattered, and who finally recognized the devastating wreckage he had created. I didn't rush to comfort him. I stood there, letting the beam of my flashlight rest on the floor between us. I had protected him from his own consequences for 5 years, and look where it had gotten me. It was time for him to feel the cold. "Sophia," he choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. He couldn't lift his head. The shame was too heavy. "Sophia, my God, what have I done? I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." "I know you are, Dad," I said quietly, the exhaustion settling deep into my bones. "But being sorry doesn't turn the lights back on. And it doesn't erase the fact that when I was sick and terrified and asking for my father, you threw me out on the street for a stranger." "I was blind," he wept, his shoulders shaking violently. "She said all the right things. She made me feel like a man again. Since your mother died, I've felt like I was drowning every single day. I couldn't bear to look at the bills. I couldn't bear to face how much I had failed her. Failed you, and Veda. She made it all seem so easy." "It wasn't easy," I corrected him gently but firmly. "I made it easy. I took the burden so you could pretend everything was fine, and that was my mistake. I shouldn't have enabled you." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a desperate, pleading vulnerability. "Can you ever forgive me? Please, Sophia, you're all I have left. Lincoln won't even return my calls. Please." I looked at the man sitting in the dark, surrounded by the rotting, expensive flowers and the shattered crystal. He wasn't the arrogant tyrant who had kicked me out. He was just a sad, broken, grieving man who had made a catastrophic mistake out of weakness and fear. "I forgive you, Dad," I said honestly. The words felt good. They lifted the final, lingering weight of anger from my chest. "I really do. You're my father and I love you." A ragged gasp of relief escaped his lips, and he reached a hand out toward me. I didn't take it. I took a slow step back. "I forgive you," I repeated, my voice steady and unwavering. "But I will never, ever be your safety net again. I am not turning the utilities back on. I am not paying your debts. My name is officially detached from this house and your finances forever." His hand slowly fell back to his side. He understood. The consequences were permanent. "What do I do?" he whispered, looking around the dark, freezing room. "You do what you should have done 5 years ago," I told him. "You call a realtor tomorrow morning. You list this house for sale. You use whatever small equity is left after paying off the mortgage to settle your credit card debts. You downsize to a small apartment that you can afford on your retail salary, and you learn how to balance a checkbook." I turned off my tactical flashlight, plunging the room back into complete darkness. "I'll call you tomorrow, Dad. Stay warm." I walked out of the house, letting the front door click shut behind me. I walked down the dark street to my car, got in, and turned the key. The engine purred to life, the heater instantly blasting warm, comforting air against my frozen face. The resolution wasn't instantaneous. The next 6 months were grueling for my father. The house saw T on the market for months before finally selling at a significant loss. He had to declare a restructured bankruptcy to manage the remaining debts. He moved into a tiny, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, far away from the prestige and comfort he had always assumed was his right. But it forced him to wake up. For the first time in his life, William was managing his own budget. He was clipping coupons, paying his own electric bill, and living within his actual means. Our relationship slowly began to mend, built on a new, fragile foundation of absolute honesty and rigid boundaries. We had coffee every Sunday. He never once asked me for money. As for Veda, or Valerie, her trial was swift. The evidence of her prolonged, calculated fraud against multiple vulnerable men was overwhelming. She was sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary, her days of manifesting abundance on the dime of manipulated victims permanently over. And me, I thrived. Stripped of the massive financial burden of carrying my father's lifestyle, my savings account skyrocketed. I moved out of the cheap motel and into a beautiful, sunlit loft downtown. I expanded my freelance business, taking on higher-paying corporate clients, pouring all of my energy and intellect into my own future instead of managing someone else's past. I had lost my childhood home, but in the process, I had found something infinitely more valuable. I had found my own unshakable independence and the absolute certainty that I would never, ever let anyone take advantage of me again.